Welcome to Forced Perspective. Hi. I'm in the forest to play now. It's a pretty nice. What? Seriously? Today we'll be taking a look at Devotion, a short Taiwanese psychological horror game with some good visuals that, despite only being about 2.5 hours, manages to tell a both compelling and unsettling story. And you should probably know that's pretty high praise for me, seeing as I don't normally like horror games. Which, yeah, I can't imagine why that is. Alright, so normally what I would do here is a, let's call it tongue-in-cheek rendition of the basic story, but seeing as this game is so narratively focused, I don't really want to spoil anything, so instead what I'm going to do is not. It's good though. Yeah, so as far as the gameplay goes, let's just get this out of the way too. Mechanically, Devotion isn't anything new. You just walk around, sometimes at an unreasonably slow pace, in a creepy or maybe unsettlingly normal location, picking up arbitrary objects that just so happen to be the exact thing you'll need in the next room, and creepy mannequins. It's nothing you haven't seen before. But what makes it special is how it shifts gears, changing tone to keep you interested and avoid scare fatigue. By the time I'm fed up with these stupid moving mannequins, we've moved on to something completely different, without it feeling rushed or disjointed. Each section flowing into the next really well, and I'm going to try to structure this review in kind by going through and breaking down each chapter in sequence, starting with the first, and in my opinion, worst chapter, Doorways. Not to say that it's bad, just a little cliche. It's home to everything you'd expect and have already seen before, from opening on a mundane domestic setting that slowly becomes more and more eerie as the sound of chopping in the kitchen continues for just a little too long, eventually crescendoing into you madly grabbing at your head and boom, spooky hallway, jump scare, demon lady. And then from there, it starts to tick all the other expected boxes. Creepy radio? Check. Mannequins? Check. Doll child should have been bundled with the other one, but check. Malfunctioning TV? Yep. Medical horror? Oh yeah. And to its credit, all of these staples are executed pretty well. The only thing is, I've seen them done just as well a dozen times over, and it doesn't affect me the way it used to. With that said, this chapter does plant the seed of what's to come in later parts and puts you in an emotional state that makes future events hit that much harder, so I do retroactively like Doorways quite a bit. It doesn't stand on its own very well, but as a part of the whole, it makes everything to come that much better. I would say a testament to this is how the next chapter, Nostalgia, is my favorite in the entire game. The basic setup is there's a locked door with a note telling you to collect fragments of the past, and when you turn around, 3 doors labeled with different dates open up. In each of these rooms, there's a different setting with clearly incomplete or missing elements, not all of them being fixable independently, some requiring items from other rooms. Now, these puzzles aren't exactly difficult. I would hesitate to even call them puzzles, more just goals, but the situations they put you in and the story payoff once each one is completed certainly kept me invested. And something of note is, once you've gotten an item relevant to another room and head over to use it, that area's scenery might have changed, making what could have otherwise been tedious backtracking a much more entertaining venture. But never quite a peaceful one, because once you've transitioned into the center connecting room, there's most likely going to be something new to disturb and unnerve you there, keeping you on your toes and maybe looking at the ground. In summary, Nostalgia's awesome and I love almost everything about it. The way details of the story are fed to you, its pacing, the way it can reliably evoke whatever emotion it needs at the time it needs it, it's crafted almost perfectly, but if I had to find a problem with it, I could actually come up with 2. The first one being something that's present throughout the entire game, but is most obvious here, and that's the inventory system. It just doesn't add anything to the game. All it does is force you to take unnecessary steps when you need to use an item. There's a record player here. I picked up a record earlier. Clearly I need to use the record on the record player, but instead of just letting me do that from here, I have to open my inventory, wait for everything to load so I can scroll over to the record, then use it. If there is ever a sense of urgency when it comes to using these items, maybe you could say it adds tension, but there isn't any situations like that. And as I said, puzzles aren't really a thing, so all of this is just a waste of time. As for the other problem, it's how Nostalgia ends. Not the conclusion to this part of the story, that's fantastic. I'm talking about the last bit of gameplay. It's a chase section, which those are possibly my least favorite thing in existence, so from the beginning it was already at a deficit for me, but it's also just not a very good one. You're in a little maze of hallways being chased by a demon woman, and if you take any wrong turns, which I did, you just circle back around and then go the other way. It's not a big deal. As long as you keep moving, she'll never catch you, and any open doors mark where you've already been, so it's just busy work. It's not that long of a section, but it sure feels like it is. The only good thing about it is being done with it and moving on to the next chapter, Devotion, which at first I thought was going to be the end. Most of the story had been told and it seemed to be wrapping up, but no, there's a spiritual aspect that has only been mentioned in passing, and this is where that gets explored. The most memorable part of this chapter is probably the visuals, both art style and location. Until this point, the game's only really taken place in this apartment building, but now you're in hell. And there's not as much going on in hell as you'd expect. This chapter's probably the least relevant story-wise, and is more a sensory experience. But it ends with a little body horror! But besides that, there's not a lot to break down here. It's visually striking. Could have been more striking if I didn't start getting frame jumps near the end of it, but it's as distinct as it's meant to be. I will say that Devotion's story, the chapter, not the whole game, I don't know why they did this to me. The story here is heavily up for interpretation on whether it's real or not, and depending on how you interpret it, I could see this entire storyline being nothing but detrimental. I personally see it as not supernatural and think it adds to the tragedy of the story, and with that mindset, I think I enjoy this chapter and the next chapter, Homecoming, more than I otherwise would. In part because Homecoming is a resolution that doesn't finish things off super clearly, but when supplemented with the way I understand Devotion, the chapter before this one, it all makes sense and ends the only way it could. Sadly. The only confusing part is why such a depressing ending has this beautiful and ending sequence. It kicks you in the gut and then gives you some pretty colors and music to sit there with. Not like you do much before it. Homecoming doesn't have anything in the way of gameplay. It's a true walking simulator. Not that I see much else it could have been considering how short this chapter is, but maybe next time simulate someone whose legs aren't broken. Look how slow this is! But in closing, Devotion is one of the few horror games to keep my attention all the way through. Maybe because it's so short, or maybe because it's not a scare-minute fright fest, tending to go with more atmospheric horror and build unease through the environment and nature of these events, rather than present that many actual scares, other than the occasional jump scare, which, in all honesty, I could have also gone without. Now, when it comes to recommendations, at the very least, I think experiencing the first half of Devotion, the game, is worth it for most, though maybe at half price. Fans of this narratively focused subgenre I see loving this, but those who normally hate this style of game aren't going to have their minds blown and preferences changed. It's good, but not that good. The biggest problem it has is its length. Being at just over 2 hours is often suspect with Steam's return policy, especially with multiple slow walking segments only serving to pad out the length more so. But as everything I've said prior to this may lead you to believe, I like this game. I don't feel cheated. It managed to hit me harder emotionally in its short runtime than most other games have, and quadruple that. All without me understanding a single spoken word. Because it's in Mandarin and I had to read the subtitles. You still might want to consider how convenient that length is, though. Or you would if the game was still on Steam, got removed over some controversy, and hi, this is where I'm at in the video.